Happy Monday, everybody. Today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 3. Go ahead and start turning there. We're talking about trusting God this week. Yesterday we saw an example of how Israel again didn't trust God, and as we're seeing a repeated pattern, they wanted to go back to Egypt. They thought what they had back in Egypt was better. As they were about to enter the promised land and they were scared of the people in the promised land, they doubted and they didn't trust God. And God's reaction was immediately he wanted to wipe them from the face of the earth and start over, as he tells Moses. But Moses pleads with God, and God has mercy. He doesn't give them the punishment they deserve, but he does give them a consequence for their actions. And the consequence is they're going to wander in the desert. I won't get too much more into detail on that. If you want, go back again, read Numbers 13, 14, and a little bit continuing to get the context on that. But we're talking about trusting God fully. You see, Proverbs 3 is going to tell us not to rely on our own understanding. But what does that mean? What does it mean to rely on your own understanding? See, relying on our own understanding is relying on logic, on the way that we can think through and process things and try to figure things out. But the reason that doesn't work is because our knowledge is limited. Often we come to a conclusion of, well, that just doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of situations like that in life. You know, our own logic may tell us one thing, but what God tells us is different. And if we're going to live like we're called to live, well, we have to agree with what God says is correct. And a lot of the time that doesn't work when we try to rely on our own understanding. And there's so many different situations that this applies in. But maybe let's look at what God is telling you to do in your life. Okay, for you, it may make sense to, I'm going to go to college one day, or I'm going to get a technical degree and do something like that, or I'm going to join the military, or whatever that may be for your plans for your life. But God may have something completely different planned out for you. What if that's the case? And what if what God has planned out for you doesn't make sense to you? Or something that applies to all of us as Christians. You are called to live not according to the ways of the world, but to the ways according to God. And to the world, those ways don't make sense. That's why Christians are persecuted today. If we rely on our own understanding, then we will live like the world lives. But if we rely on the understanding of God and we trust Him, then we'll live opposite to the world. And that applies to all of us as Christians. You see, our own understanding is limited, but God's is not. So all the questions that you have in life, to the situations that you may be in, or the situations you see around you, God has the answers to those. He doesn't always share it with us, but He has a purpose and a reasoning behind the things that He does and behind the way things are. We can't understand that a lot of the time. And in Proverbs chapter 3, it says this about it. Verse 5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." So what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to trust. Not rely on what we can figure out about things and let that lead us through life, but simply trust what God tells us to do, acknowledging Him in every step of the way, knowing that if we do that, He's going to continue to make that path straight for us so that we can follow.